By 1997, Konami's Castlevania franchise was already a decade old. It had already had some ups and downs, defined a genre, and left its impact on the industry. But through all that time, the gameplay had only marginally changed, and the rest of the gaming world was moving on. The jump to 5th generation consoles like the PlayStation 1 and the Nintendo 64 was in full swing, and 2D games were being gently but firmly retired. So Konami's thinking was that if they wanted to continue with Castlevania, they'd have to completely reinvent the series. They'd have to jump to 3D, and in doing so, completely change the mechanics of the game. It would basically be brand new. So with great excitement and optimism, they commissioned a team to make them the first game of the new Castlevania. But that would take a couple of years, and in the meantime, they had a different crew work on a quick, cheap side project. This one would be 2D all the way through, it wouldn't star one of the main characters, and it wouldn't really modernize anything. It was a niche product for hardcore fans. But to Konami's surprise, their 3D remake fell flat on its face, while the cheap side project transformed into one of the most legendary games of its era. The side project was created as a direct sequel to Rondo of Blood, which was the Japanese version of Dracula X. Richter Belmont would return, but he would not be the main character. Rather, the game's creators dug deep into the franchise's history and uncovered an old character, Dracula's backwards spelled son, Alucard from Castlevania 3. Since it wasn't supposed to be a part of the main series, the crew was allowed a bit more creative freedom than they might have otherwise. And so, it was this secondary character who became the star of the show, though his quest would be pretty routine. Go to Dracula's castle and defeat him. But having all that freedom, and at the same time knowing that this might be the last 2D Castlevania, the crew decided to go all out. They would embrace all the elements of the series they loved, and toss out or change anything that had become overdone. Gone was the singular whip weapon. Alucard would be armed to the teeth with the coolest weaponry 18th century sorcerers could offer. In were the RPG elements. More so than any other game in the franchise, this title would feature a leveling system for both the vampire and his weapons. The more he killed, the better he got at killing. Also back was the idea of branching levels. But before, this had meant alternate paths to the same end. Here, Alucard would be dropped into a castle with a huge number of rooms and hallways. Each section would have its own theme and tone, and would either be part of the story or would give Alucard a new ability or weapon. Some parts of the castle couldn't be reached except by using these powers, which meant that gamers could return to an earlier room to find that there were whole segments he couldn't access before. It was a game that just kept on giving. Since it was developed for the PlayStation 1, it would also have a level of graphical polish and fluidity that previous games could only dream of. Despite the level-up system and the branching paths, it would still very much be a 2D action game at heart. Walk down the hallway and make them wish they had never been born. Or dead. Or something. Anyway, Castlevania Symphony of the Night released in Japan in March 1997 and in North America in October. Again, this was a niche product meant only for hardcore fans of the series, so Konami produced a limited number of copies and sent them to stores. But then, something unexpected happened. The stores sold out. So Konami made some more. And then they sold out. So Konami kept making more, and the more they made, the more they sold. Somewhere along the way, the Symphony crew had done something they were never supposed to do. They'd crafted a masterpiece. There was nothing in the game that was particularly groundbreaking, but somehow it just all synergized into one of the most polished and perfected action experiences ever put onto a console. Gamers could go anywhere, do anything, and slay their foes in whatever way fit their style. Word of mouth spread like wildfire, and before they knew it, Konami had what every publisher dreamed of, a smash hit made on the cheap. So after exploring the castle and defeating the final boss, Richter Belmont, players put down their controllers and eagerly awaited the next Castlevania, the long-awaited 3D title. But then, while they waited, something strange happened. Gamers started hearing about parts of Symphony of the Night that they'd never played. People talked about defeating Dracula, but Dracula had never been in the game, had he? But the word started to spread. Richter Belmont was a feint. Yes, you could beat him, and you'd get a final cutscene followed by credits. But if you chose to do something else, and not defeat Belmont, suddenly a completely different bad guy would show up, tell you you'd never even been in the right castle, and introduce you to an inverted version of the castle that you'd have to play through all over again. That's right, half the people who played the game only played half of it. Literally. The inverted castle sequence nearly doubled the entire playtime, leading up to a totally different final boss and multiple different endings. Symphony of the Night wasn't just a game you had to play, it was a game you had to play twice. When word of this fake ending really got rolling, it only led to even more sales of a game that had already exceeded Konami's highest expectations. It went on to become a legend and completely reignited the Castlevania fire. But Konami wasn't done yet. In 1999, it was at last time to unveil the series' arrival into the third dimension. And so to the Nintendo 64 there came Castlevania. And it was horrible. After the unexpected genius of Symphony of the Night, Castlevania was an unexpected catastrophe. By the standards of 1999, it looked terrible. The controls were loose and clunky. It featured no characters or even side characters from earlier games. In essence, there was nothing to tie it back into Castlevania, other than the re-return of Dracula. Worse, there was a lot of proposed content that just didn't make the deadline. Entire levels, characters, and storylines were cut. While this is hardly unheard of, Konami made the decision to keep working on all that and then release the game again as Castlevania Legacy of Darkness in the exact same year. Fans were outraged that they'd been punished for their early loyalty. Everyone else didn't really pay attention. Neither game was a big seller. In one breath, Castlevania had gone from its very peak to withering on the vine. The Nintendo 64 games nearly put a stake in the franchise for good. But Konami still had faith in a series that had survived low points before. And sure enough, as the new millennium dawned, Castlevania would rise from the grave to fight again. Tune in next time to see Castlevania go both 2D and 3D.